Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This morning, with God's help, we'll conclude this book this morning, the book entitled The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. It's as I've said many times on the broadcast, it's not only an admission by an authorized Roman Catholic author, but it's a boast, a braggadocious book touting the extent to which the Vatican controls both foreign and domestic policy, especially for the United States, but of the whole world. Last time we concluded with a discussion about Cuba, Rome's machinations in Cuba, and we'll return to that subject this morning in the middle of the page 233 if you're following along in your own copy of the book. It says, as for Cuba, change will come sooner or later. The Cuban people may well seek freedom and a more democratic regime. Here, too, the Holy See will have important opportunities to promote and shape the future. Okay? The Holy See is going to shape and promote the future of Cuba. It says, the Cuban Revolution beginning in 1959 was hard on the local Catholic Church. The Castro government confiscated church property, closed Catholic schools, and jailed Roman Catholic clergy. Catholics fought back, but in the end, most dissidents were imprisoned or fled the country, or learned to practice their faith privately, away from the prying eyes of Cuba's government. I'll just tell you, the Vatican was wholly behind the Cuban government. It was using Cuba as a threat against the United States to persuade the American people to do the Pope's bidding overseas, and Castro provided that threat, that terroristic threat of communism right off the 90 miles off the shores of Florida. And it was during the height of the Cold War. My belief is, and I don't want to belabor the point, it's not germane to the subject this morning, but Rome was trying to fulfill a potential fulfillment of the Fatima secret. And it was all politics and religion. And it just happened to be that since the Roman Catholic Church the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church was so deeply involved in this clandestine effort to use the United States, that it had to do it with the utmost secrecy to have plausible deniability. And he used the godless communist, Jesuit trained, by the way, Castro, to accomplish the Pope's bidding. And so the Roman Catholic Church has remained protected because it was godless communism. Certainly, you can't blame the Roman Catholic Church for something that a godless communist nation does, or so that is what the people believe. But in fact, the Jesuits created communism. The Jesuits control Russia, they controlled Cuba, they controlled China, and all the other communist nations. And through those governments, Rome achieves her eventual end. And Cuba was no different. But it just happens that when Rome chooses a communist government to do its bidding, its secret bidding in the world, it's an unfortunate situation for Catholics of that nation. Okay, in a godless communist country, Roman Catholics and Christians of other quote-unquote denominations are equally persecuted and punished. See, Rome sacrifices her own because she believes her global aims are more important even than her card-carrying members. And so the Roman Catholic suffering in Cuba was just, a dire consequence of what Rome was trying to do through Cuba. Now it says a policy of state-enforced atheism was finally revoked in 1992, and in 1998 the Cuban Catholic Church was revitalized by a visit from Pope John Paul II, a watershed moment that brought Catholics back into the mainstream. Okay, now this transition is taking place because communism had done its duty, it had achieved its end, and America complied with the apparent necessities, and now Rome wants democracy in Cuba. The United States wants democracy in Cuba. And that's no threat to the papacy because of the success that the papacy has had to control this democracy. All right. Now he says Pope Benedict XVI made his own trip to Cuba in the spring of 2012, speaking before crowds of tens of thousands in Revolution Square. Cuba today is largely Catholic. The church estimates that 60 to 70% of Cubans are believers, including some members of the ruling Communist Party. The Catholic Church maintains a nuanced relationship with the Cuban government, staying true to its mission and values on the one hand, not rashly provoking the government on the other. There are Cuban dissidents and Cuban Americans who believe that Cardinal Jaime Ortega, Archbishop of Havana, has been too compliant with the Castro government, in contrast with those heroic Cold War Eastern European prelates like Karl Wojtyła, the future John Paul II, who stood up to their nation's despots. Likewise, many people regret that while he was in Cuba, Pope Benedict XVI did not meet with Las Damas en Blanca, that is, the Ladies in White, a Catholic group of wives and mothers and other women who formed in 2003 to protest the imprisonment of political dissidents. But if the Cuban church has acquiesced in some circumstances, it has hardly been silent or inactive. Cardinal Ortega helped negotiate the release of dozens of political prisoners in 2009 and 10, and the church has used its publications to air social problems in Cuba, including articles that are frankly critical of the government. On a very practical level, the Archdiocese of Havana, in collaboration with a Spanish university, has begun offering graduate courses in business to help Cubans transition to a free market economy, while Caritas Cuba, that is, Cuba's Roman Catholic charity institution, works to provide much-needed pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. Perhaps its most important role will come in the future, the Cuban Catholic Church as the de facto alternative to the Communist Party, as the only organized social institution with the infrastructure and moral authority to act independently of the state, will be a critical institution to lead and guide the transition to a free Cuba. And trust me, as long as the man of sin still reigns on the throne in Rome, there will be no freedom for Cubans. Just as there will be no freedom for Americans, and especially Protestant Americans. Now, looking deeper into the future, perhaps the most dynamic evolution of the church will occur in another communist country, China. Catholics remain a small fraction of the Chinese population, but are likely to grow in numbers and influence in the coming century. Now, don't let the author, confuse you. The Jesuits have been in control of China for a long time, just like they were in control through Stalin and Trotsky and all the other communists in Russia. The Jesuits found refuge in Russia after their suppression in 1773, and the Jesuits have run the Soviet Union, they run China, North Korea, all the communist nations. Now it says in some ways, the situation in China is an analogous throwback requiring the church to fight battles settled long ago in most of the world regarding, for example, the right of investiture, that is, the right of the Pope to pick all the bishops. Look, as I've said before and repeatedly on this program, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church in whatever nation it exists, that is, the archbishops, the bishops, the cardinals, the priests, they constitute a shadow government. They are the Pope's eyes and ears over the government of every nation where Roman Catholicism exists. And China has been blocked off into dioceses, just like the United States is cordoned off in dioceses. The shadow government exists in China just like it does in the United States of America. Now he says, on the whole, the challenge is much as it is in other parts of the world. The church is pressing for religious freedom where civil rights are in short supply. And I'll just tell you, Rome is seeking to control nations where civil rights are not consistent with the papacy's decree. Remember, all rights, according to Roman Catholic canon law, come from the breast of the Pope. Okay? Whatever human rights we enjoy in this country, they are attributed to the Pope, because the Pope can give them and the Pope can take them away through the government. And we've seen our government for decades now taking away the liberties of the people. That's because Rome is in control. Now it says the Chinese government is keeping a tight handle on the church, but the Holy See represents a patient yet persistent voice for freedom of religion. Okay? Freedom of religion is simply a phrase that covers the true meaning, which is freedom for Catholics to control. Freedom for the Pope to rule supreme, both over spiritual things and over temporal things. And it says, as the American founders understood, and as the Chinese rulers evidently fear, oppression ends where freedom of religion begins. And when we won religious freedom in this country, what we really won was religious freedom for Catholics to take over the country. Whereas before, early in the colonial period, Roman Catholicism was illegal. The Jesuits were feared beyond measure, and Roman Catholicism was suppressed because the Protestants of the colonial period knew much about the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits and simply wanted Christ to rule in the United States of America and not the Pope. Now, dealing with China will require all of the Vatican's diplomatic ingenuity. Not only must it find accommodation with the government, but it will also have to reconcile the state-sanctioned, quote-unquote, official church with the underground church, and finally appease Taiwanese Catholics. In the end, though, I suspect that both China and the church will make each other stronger. Of course, that's the great hope for the United States of America, isn't it? That's what this author has been preaching all throughout the book. When Rome and Washington are close, both benefit. Okay? Now, he says there are limits to the church's ability to influence the behavior of societies, says the author. It cannot force its will, having no economic or military leverage. Now, we know that's not true. The Vatican controls lock, stock, and barrel the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Federal Reserve Bank controls all the banks in the country, all the central banks. And the United States isn't the only nation in the world that has a Jesuit-controlled Federal Reserve Bank. All the banking industries throughout the world are ultimately controlled by the Jesuits. That's how they've achieved a global economic system. All right? But the author is deceiving here. He says there are limits to the church's ability to influence the behavior of societies. What was it the Freemasonic Jesuit financier Rothschild said? Let me control a nation's money, and I don't care who makes the laws. Okay? And we learn from F. Tupper Saucy in his book, Rulers of Evil, that the Rothschilds are the guardians of the papal treasure. The guardians of the papal treasure. They are the Vatican's bankers. And so the Jesuit, or rather the Rothschild banking system, which is global, is a Roman Catholic banking system controlled by the Jesuits. Okay, that's how you control a nation. You control its laws, you control its money, you control its military. All right? Now, so again, he says there are limits to the church's ability to influence the behavior of societies. It cannot force its will, having no economic or military leverage. That's a bald-faced lie. That is a bald-faced lie. History defies what this man just said. The Vatican controlled the Crusades. He motivated the nations of Europe to go to war to secure the Middle East, Rome, or rather Jerusalem and Israel. The Vatican had so much control over and influence over the behavior of the societies during the Dark Ages that they were literally slaves to the papacy. They were driven to paupers by the papacy. Their young men were slaughtered in all these crusades. It led to an economic crisis throughout the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire. And nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. So when you read this, where there's limits to the church's ability to influence the behavior of societies, and that it cannot force its will or having no economic or military leverage, is simply completely ignorant of the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. He says, nor is it likely to motivate great spontaneous uprisings. What happened this author contradicts himself so many times. This book is full of examples of how the popes, and particularly in this case John Paul II, rose up a spontaneous uprising in Poland. And here he dares to say that the Vatican is not likely to motivate a great spontaneous uprising in the manner of revolutionary movements, since its message is essentially conservative, grounded in thousands of years of tradition. Bald-faced lies. Now it says it cannot even dependably deliver political blocks to election booths, since Catholics are found all along the political spectrum. Well, looky here. We have the Vatican behind the U.S. State Department and the Immigration Department, allowing Roman Catholic South and Central Americans to come into the United States and just literally take over our jobs, take over our benefits and entitlements, completely collapse the system so they can fill the voting booths, not to mention that the Vatican controls both Democratic and Republican politics in this country. Do you see how bald-faced this liar is? He says, but it's precisely in these failings that its greatness lies. The church appeals above and beyond might, money, and political power to a deeper recognition in human beings of what is good and right. What was it the one character on television used to say, gag me with a spoon, right? This Roman Catholic Church is so wonderful, says this author, when the Bible identifies it as the synagogue of Satan, and its head is the man of sin, the son of perdition. The one who deceives the whole world, the one who reigns over the kings of the earth, the one who has soaked the earth with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Listen to what this author says. The Roman Catholic Church appeals above and beyond might, money, or political power to a deeper recognition in human beings of what is good and right. What is good and right about humanity when it is deceived by pedophiles all over the world, pedophile priests, I mean, this church is expert at describing white as black and black as white. They reward evil and they punish good. They call good evil and evil good. They are aptly described in the in the Bible and confirmed in history. It says the influence of the church springs from the same well that gives it endurance. Now let me tell you where. Straight from the bottomless pit. Okay? It stands for something, says the author. The same thing every day, every year, every place. Its message is universal, that is Catholic, that is satanic, through time and through space. All right? The Catholic Church is at a crossroads, says the author. Challenges bear down from all directions in the forms of secularization and scandals. The message of the Catholic Church is one of hope for peace, charity, love, and the good news of Christianity. But not a lot of good reaches the Vatican these days. Certainly not from the Western media, which lavishes coverage on the papal transitions, but otherwise seldom carries a positive story about the church. Let me tell you something. The press in this country serves the Roman Catholic Church best and most effectively when it never researches the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, nor does it warn the people of the world about it. If this author can levy even one legitimate criticism of the press for picking on the Pope and picking on the scandals, it has blessed that church incalculably by leaving silent on the message of the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. So don't be deceived when this author tries to put the press as somehow unresponsive, if not negative, toward the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church. It serves the church most loyally by never exposing the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order to the people. Never exposing how much power, influence, and authority the papacy has over our very government. Not just the federal government, but your state governments, your county governments, even your local city municipal system. It never exposes the Vatican's control of the courts, either in the Supreme Court, where it is supreme, right on down to your local magistrate. That is how the press serves the man of sin, the son of perdition in this world. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. All right. He says this is understandably frustrating for the vast majority of Catholic prelates who give their lives to serving God as best they can, for the church seems at times to be under siege. Both friends and enemies of the church might recall the lesson that Napoleon and Stalin had learned in his own way. As the author and historian Hilary Belloc put it, quote, "The church is a perpetually defeated thing that always outlives her conquerors," unquote. There is much good still to come from the church, especially in areas where the Holy See and the United States find themselves in alignment. That's it right there, isn't it? He acknowledges that the world is blessed when the Holy See and the United States are in alignment. This is confirmation of our interpretation of Revelation chapter 13, describing the first beast who rose up out of the sea of people and governments of Europe during the Old World Order, and then the second beast that rises up out of the earth, the United States of America, that causes the whole world to worship the first beast, the Vatican, the papacy. That's why it is essential for the United States and the Holy See to remain in alignment. The New World Order, which is simply the restoration of the Old World Order, is dependent upon that mutual alignment. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who pays the bills and sponsors this program by paying those bills. And we thank God that Nicholas was wise enough to understand the value of Inquisition Update and to see its importance enough to even cover the bills I couldn't pay to be on this network. And I would simply go silent or go into a lesser venue, a free venue where I could continue. And we thank First Amendment Radio and ask God's blessings on First Amendment Radio. Now, we'll conclude with the last paragraph of the book. He says, as discussed in earlier pages, particularly the first chapters of this book, he's saying that the United States was born of many of the same convictions that define the Catholic Church. In other words, he is saying that the United States was founded on Catholic principles. Never mind what the Protestant pilgrims desired for this country. a government of, by, and for the people, where Christ was its head, and the government simply served the people and fulfilled its biblical and its legal role as the rewarder of good and the punisher of evil, the Roman Catholic Church took over that government. In the name of religious liberty, won control of the formulation of our government, and it has put into practice, into law, Roman Catholic canon law. And again, I reference probably one of the best works available. For those who like videos, simply go to YouTube and type in the title in the search engine there, Vatican Control Through Civil Law. Vatican Control Through Civil Law by Richard Bennett, and watch that video until you comprehend that the laws of this nation are fashioned consistent not with God's law, which Christians say is dead today, but Roman Catholic canon law. And that is it is the civil laws of this country that make America Catholic. The very laws that we all bind upon one another unwittingly is not God's law, but Roman Catholic canon law. And the Christian world, if it finds someone in violation of one of those canon laws, binds him to obedience to that canon law, despite that they are contrary to God's holy, eternal, and immutable law. We are wholly perverted in our understanding of the Scriptures. We are wholly perverted in the status of God's holy, eternal, and immutable law, and we have exchanged it for Roman Catholic canon law, and we bind it upon one another. And we do it in the name of Christ. That's just how deceived we are. All right, if one of us were to stand up in rebellion against the civil laws of this country, claiming that it's not God's law, it's not the jurisdiction of the state to impose Roman Catholic canon law upon its citizens, why, he would be labeled in the Christian world as a lawbreaker, a criminal, and he should be put in jail. That's the position that 99.9% of Christians in this country would take. If we simply refuse to obey Roman Catholic canon law, which is the civil law of this land, in preference of God's holy, eternal, and immutable law, we would be labeled by the Christian world as lawbreakers. You can't get more deceived than that. You can't become a more loyal slave of the Antichrist than that. And just as it was in the old world order, it's going to be quote-unquote Christians who are going to be persecuting God's people. Because there's going to come a time when my conscience will no longer permit me to spit in the face of my God and my Creator and continue to obey civil laws that were written in the bowels of hell itself to control my spirit, to control my flesh, and to control my destiny and damn me to a Christless eternity. And I'll stand convicted by the very people who have been loyal listeners to my program because they don't fully understand how they've been deceived. He says, as discussed earlier in these pages, the United States was born of many of the same convictions that define the synagogue of Satan. A belief in laws, Roman Catholic canon laws, that transcend human power and caprice, those papal given, not God given, unalienable rights, unquote, on which Thomas Jefferson, the deist, based his arguments in the Declaration of Independence. He used flowery words, but he was not a servant of Christ. He was a deceiver. He was serving the Roman Catholic Church. Again, I reference The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers by Christian J. Pinto of Adullam Films. The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers. Learn about the Founding Fathers and why and how precisely we have been deceived about them and who they really served. It's a brilliant expose of the founding, quote-unquote, fathers of this country. Now, he says the relationship between the Holy See and the United States is a story of two powers failing for years to recognize what was best in the other and how much they shared in common. How much we share in common with the Holy See of Rome. Only recently has the church shaken off its monarchical fears of democracy and come to embrace the very values it inspired, the very values it inspired in the United States. Likewise, only recently has the American public rejected the prejudices so contrary to American ideals that poisoned its view of the Roman Catholic Church. Poisoned our view of the Roman Catholic Church? The Protestant pilgrims of this country declared the Roman Catholic Church to be the greatest of all fears of any nation, and they were absolutely right, and there's no better testament to their correctness than the existence of the status of the government of the United States today as a pack mule slave of the papacy, the man of sin. We've got a whole lot of repenting to do in this country. We've got a whole lot of re-education to do in this country. And I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to it. And if First Amendment Radio will give me the time, I'll do it till I die. He says, having each gained from the other, that is, the United States gained from the man of sin, and the man of sin gained by the United States, we are now in a position to recognize what is best in ourselves and to appreciate our mutual interests and objectives. What mutual interest should the United States have with the man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist of the Bible? What mutual interest should we have? None. He says, where the Holy See possesses leverage and tools available to the United States, the unique, quote-unquote, soft power of a sovereign lacking territorial or hegemonic agendas. You talk about baloney? How can you be more territorial or more hegemonic than the papacy, who claims to be the vicar of Christ and that the earth is his footstool? How could you be more territorial and hegemonic than to say that you are the God over the consciences of every man, woman, and child on the planet, and that every man, woman, and child, every human creature must be subject to the Roman pontiff? Territorial and hegemonic? He wrote the book! And he is achieving that territorial sovereignty of that hegemonic agenda by the help of the United States of America, more than any other nation on the planet. He says the United States should encourage and assist the Holy See in putting forth its message, not God's message, not the message of Jesus Christ, not the gospel, but the Holy See's message. That's the business of the government of the United States. That is their goal. That is their stated purpose. And should we be complicit with it in any degree? He says, likewise, as the only nation founded upon the unalienable rights of humans, including the right to unfettered religious freedom. That's right, unfettered religious freedom. You can be a Freemason worshiping Lucifer. You can be the Antichrist of Rome and all of his followers worshiping a fat little pedophile on a man-made throne in a man-made temple in man-made Rome. Or you can believe in the one and only Christ, Jesus, who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease 2,000 years ago, and find yourself in opposition to everything in this world. Now do you understand why Jesus said, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind"? Unfettered religious freedom that gave the Vatican the control it needed to control this country. That gave the Freemasons the freedom to worship Lucifer openly and in assistance to the Holy See to get control of our government. That's why the founding fathers were, for the most part, almost unanimously Freemasons. They were working for the Jesuits. Including the right to unfettered religious freedom, the United States merits the support and cooperation of the Holy See in advancing these shared values throughout the world. And now you know who George H.W. Bush was speaking about when he talked about a new world order. George H.W. Bush was a Pope-serving, oath-spitting Knight of Malta, and a Freemason to boot. Why won't they tell you any of this in the mainstream media? Why won't they tell you any of this in your church? He's deceived the whole world. And I don't want it said that he deceived any of my listeners. Now, the author has concluded the book and now goes to the acknowledgments. I won't read the acknowledgments. I'll be criticized for this. Someone's liable to say, someone who used to be my friend will say that I didn't read the acknowledgments because it names the Jesuits, the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, Jesuit-trained, educated politicians, and everybody else who helped to write this book. But my listeners don't need the names. They know. Common sense will tell them that a book that completely outs the Vatican's agenda for the United States of America could not have been written and would not have been allowed to come to press were it not for the help of an infinite number of Jesuits. They're named in the acknowledgments of this book. They are named. You can read them for themselves. He doesn't even try to hide the fact that they're Jesuits. Knights of Malta. The acknowledgments in the back of this book reads like the who's who of the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits. This is a confession. This book constitutes an absolute confession that the first Christians of this country, the true Bible-believing Christians who said that Rome was the greatest of all fears to be feared in a nation, the greatest of all evils to be feared in a nation, were absolutely correct in their assessments. And they died defending their Protestant beliefs. And no one takes it to heart. They're never mentioned. And now that America has sown to the wind, it will reap the whirlwind. A nation that could have served Christ and Him only has become the right arm, the battle axe of the man of sin. And I choose not to go down with it. I repent of being deceived for most of my life. I repent for being loyal to a nation that has so betrayed the Lamb of God. And I'll suffer the consequences in this life. But I'll be rewarded with a crown that will never grow old. It's a painful thing to come to the grips of reality. The biblical and prophetic role that the United States has played is described in Revelation chapter 13. Rome is described in Revelation chapter 17. The New World Order is described in Revelation chapter 17 and 18. And we can take it to heart. You know, at first, it was an idea that I resisted. You know, it becomes evident after a while when a person continues his studies and research honestly and willing to admit the truth, that I find myself a man without a nation. And it was a horrifying concept. I mean, we don't know how to live. We just simply don't know how to live unless we're members of a quote-unquote society. But now I understand. I am a member of a society. I have a king, and I'm a subject of his kingdom. We have a country. We have a constitution. And we have an eternity to worship our King. And now it's easy for me to let go of this earthly kingdom. Now, the kingdom to which I belong has length and breadth, height and dimension. And it is timeless. The one to which I so eagerly clung to in my ignorance is going to be destroyed. Why hang on to something that we know deep down in our hearts, if we understand and have read the Bible, we know that every earthly kingdom in the history of this world is going to be destroyed by Christ himself, and his kingdom will take over. Why do we clutch so tenaciously onto a system whose end has already been predicted by our Savior? So let us prepare for the future. Let us prepare for the here and now. In the light of our new understanding. The global Vatican is going to be destroyed. The New World Order is going to be destroyed. And great will be the fall of it. God hasten the day. Now, if I have not yet convinced my listeners, each and every one, about who the Antichrist is and how he operates and how he is perceived in the world, I'm going to make another attempt. On Monday, I'm going to begin reading a book entitled Rome and Civil Liberty by J.A. Wiley, a Protestant a Bible-believing Protestant of England who is going to reveal to us how, after having once overthrown the Roman power in England and Great Britain, the United Kingdom, how Rome attempted to reestablish primacy over that Protestant land. And we're going to understand from the history of England and Great Britain exactly how the Vatican did the same in the United States of America. It's a very enlightening book. James A. Wiley's been featured here on Inquisition Update in the past. I read his History of the Waldenses, and it reveals the relentless, centuries-long persecution of Bible-believing Christians in the Alps. Most likely, the church that Paul started in Rome, who eventually were persecuted until they had to find refuge in the mountains in northern Italy. The Waldenses. Holed up in the mountains, in the valleys, the fertile valleys, worshiping God, building a life of Christ, a life without Antichrist. They resisted Rome's advances. They resisted Rome's machinations. They scoffed and sneered when the Pope called himself the Vicar of Christ, the replacement of the Son of God. They were true Protestants. Centuries before the Protestant Reformation, they were Bible-believing Protestants. And what made them Protestants is that they protested against the Antichrist of the Bible, the papacy. It was a wonderful book. It drew a lot of attention from the listeners, lots of favorable comments, and a lot of eyes were opened. This book by James A. Wiley is going to be equally eye-opening, and I hope you'll tune in. And I'll do my best to read J. A. Wiley's Rome and Civil Liberties to Monday on the broadcast. It's going to be a difficult read for me. British English is a bit difficult, unorthodox compared to our way of speaking today, but I'll do my best to bring it into terms that we can all understand. But it is an eye-opener. I've spent the last several weeks reading this book. And I'm not done with it yet. It's going to be a working weekend for me in preparation for Monday's broadcast. But I think the global Vatican, the one that we just concluded, if understood from a Protestant perspective, as I have tried to give here on First Amendment Radio, that book literally makes any further reading, any further proofs of Rome's control of the world unnecessary. If all my listeners could read the 80 or 90 different programs, consecutive programs that we've done in the reading of this book, you can come to no other conclusion. You need no other proof. Rome doesn't just admit it anymore. She boasts about it. She rules the world. The old world order has been restored. The new world order is in place. And what that bodes for God's true Bible-believing Christians, only history can reveal. It's going to be a bloodbath of God's people unless Christ himself delivers us. Thanks for listening. I'll see you Monday.